Hello, good morning, friends. I think we are live right now. I hope we are. It is Monday morning at 7 o'clock my time. So hopefully you're awake and let's go ahead and get started. I think it's time. So just to remind you, my name is Mindy Foote, and I am an AP Music Theory teacher out in California. Last time I saw you, I gave you a fun fact that I also teach Algebra 2 Trig. And every time we meet, I want to tell you a little bit more about myself, just so you know who this crazy person behind the camera is. My primary instrument is bassoon. Now, I haven't picked up and played the bassoon in a while, but I did major in music in college. I have a Bachelor of Music degree in performance, and the bassoon helped to pay for my college. I was able to get a scholarship with that. Nowadays, I would say my primary instrument is probably piano. I play piano a lot with my classes and at home with my children. And tomorrow, or no, it'll be 2 days from now, I'll tell you more about some other instruments that I play. So stay tuned for that. All right. Last time we met, last week, whenever that was, I gave you an assignment to do, and it was a release question from the 2019 exam. This is FRQ 6, and we are part writing given the Roman numerals. And of course, we have a secondary dominant in here. So we are going to tackle this together today. And hopefully, again, this is something that you've already done. And so I'm going to go relatively fast through it. We're just kind of checking our answers at this point in time. So I'm going to be showing my work down at the bottom as we did last week. So starting off with our 5/7 chord, we're in the key of A. So counting up from A, B, C, D, E, G sharp, B, D. We're in root position, so the bass for sure needs to be an E. And then our choices from here, we are looking at the voicing that was given to us and thinking about our nice smooth voice leading. Remember, one of the main things to think about is we want to avoid any leaps. So for example, this E I'm going to have go to a D. Let's have the A go down to a G, and our C can go to a B. So we have an E, we'll double check, G, B, D. Okay, coming into the 6th chord. Again, we're in the key of A, so counting up. Remember always to start with A as 1, A, B, C, D, E, F, but it's an F sharp because of the key. This time we just have a triad. Now, last week we talked a lot about the resolutions of the dominant 7th chord, or the secondary dominant. But we need to also remember that in a regular dominant, here it's a dominant 7th chord, we have some resolutions also. In the key of A, our primary leading tone here is G sharp, a half step down. So in this case, the voice that is singing the G sharp really should go up to an A. Now, the College Board, the AP scoring guide, they're only going to mark off points if you do not resolve the leading tone when it's in an outer voice. However, I like to tell my students, you know what, get in the habit of always resolving that leading tone, even if it's in the alto. It's just a good habit. There are obviously some exceptions there. And then we also have our 7th. In this case, it's in the tenor. That needs to go down to a C. Of course, our root, we don't get to choose what the root is. It is root position, so it's got to be an F sharp. And that leaves me with just the soprano that I have a choice on here. Let's see what I already have: a complete spelling, an F sharp, an A, and a C sharp. So we have a little bit of freedom. We could double the root of the chord, which would be the F sharp, or we could double the third. I'm looking at the soprano is coming from a B, and to leap to an F sharp would not be great. So instead, I'm going to have it go down to an A and just share that same note with the alto. Okay, next we've got our secondary dominant. So when we get to the secondary dominant, we're going to skip it momentarily and move to the next chord, which in this case is a 2/6 chord. I'm going to ignore the 6, just think about 2 in the key of A. A, B. So we have a B, a D, and an F sharp. Now I said I was going to ignore the 6, but once you're ready to start part writing, like if we want to put in the bass now, we can. That would need to be a D because that's first inversion there. So now if we go back to our 5-4-2 of 2, we're going to take the 5th of this 2 chord, which is the F sharp, and slide that over. And we are going to build our dominant 7th based on the F sharp. So the first thing I like to do is just put in the letter names. F, A, C, E. The 4-2 indicates that we do want a 7th here. So now we need it to be a major minor 7th. So starting on an F sharp, we need an A sharp and a C sharp. Given the key signature, the F and the C are already sharp, but notice this A is going to be our altered tone. Another way for you to think about it is the idea of tonicization. We are temporarily, momentarily making B, the key of B, the tonic, because that is the of 2 part. So in the key of B, we would want an A sharp, not an A natural. And then when it comes to the E here, remember we want it to be a major minor 7th chord. So from F sharp up to E, we're thinking, is that a minor 7th or not? Sometimes counting up is tricky. So if you want to think about the inversion instead, you can think about going down a whole step, F sharp down to E. And so the E is good. I don't need to alter that pitch. All right, 4-2 means third inversion, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 2. So I'm going to put the E in the bass. We do not have a choice on that one. Ooh, my stem is a little out of control there, sorry. Okay, where do we want to go? How about the tenor is already on a C. Let's keep him on a C sharp. Nice and boring. The alto and soprano are currently sharing this A, and we need one of them to go to an A sharp. So since that movement is up, we would want that to be the soprano pitch so that we don't worry about cross relation or voice crossing here. So instead, what do we have left over for the alto? The root of our chord, F sharp. So let's double check. We've got an F, an A, and it's an F sharp, but I don't need the sharp because it's part of the key. A sharp, C sharp, and E. Wonderful. Okay, so now our resolution. This was the primary focus of our lesson last week. We have our 7th is already being resolved down, which is super nice. Another thing that I should mention, sometimes my students ask me here in the Roman numerals, why doesn't it say 5-4-2 of 2-6? Because we're going to a 2-6. And you know, it's not a bad thought, but what we really want to do with the bottom part of this slash, it's like the denominator of a fraction there, is we're using that as the temporary tonic. So I don't really care what inversion it's in when I'm trying to figure out what this 5 is of. It's a 5 of B. Yes, the B chord ends up in first inversion, but that's why it's just 2 right here instead of 2-6. Okay, what is the other note that we have to make sure that we resolve in this 5-4-2 of 2? We have the 7th going down and there's another tendency tone. Do you remember what it was? It's the secondary leading tone. Now remember, we are momentarily tonicizing the key of B. So a half step down from B would be an A sharp. So this A sharp, which is in the soprano, needs to go up to B because that's our temporary leading tone. All righty, so what do we have left? We've got a B, a D, I need an F sharp. Remember the 5th, sometimes we end up leaving out, but in this case, the alto can very easily sing the F. And what do we want the tenor to go to? How about the D? All righty, almost there. 5 chord in the key of A, B, C, D, E, G sharp, B, Notice this time it does not have the seventh, so don't put a D on there accidentally. Okay, let me show you a common mistake I see my students make. Anytime we are going from a predominant to a dominant, we have a 2, 6 to 5. We're coming from D's right here, and we need 2 E's because normally we would double the bass, or we would double the root here. So the bass, you don't have a choice for. That definitely has to be an E. And then they think to themselves, oh, I know, I need another E, and this is currently on a D, so here we go. And oh, wait, it gets worse. I hope you did not do this, by the way. This is bad. Maybe we're going to have this F go up too, and then we end up with all of these lovely parallels. So if you didn't hear me say it, again, the problem with this is that this is parallel octaves, and we cannot have that. That's against one of our rules. So get out our eraser here. And the bass we can't control. The bass has to go up like that. So instead, what we do anytime we have especially a predominant to a dominant here, and remember a 2-6 is a predominant, just like a 4 chord is a predominant. We want contrary motion. Our bass is going up, so everybody else should be going down. So let's look at this D and think what we could have him go down to. We can't have him go up to an E. The G sharp is quite a ways away. That would be a strange leap for the tenor to have to sing. So instead, the B would be a nice, just a leap of a third. That's much easier to sing. We could have the alto go down to the E, and then the soprano could go down to the G. 2 E's, a G, G sharp, and a B, looking good. And when we have our dominant to tonic at the end, we do want to remember to resolve that leading tone again from the beginning. Our G sharp is in the soprano, so for sure she needs to resolve. Ooh, and I'm also looking at our time signature here. We are in the key, or the time, oh no, that's not what I want to do. The time signature of 4/4, so sorry. Let's make that a half note at the end. Pen. Okay, so it's a funky looking half note, but that'll do. Okay, our leading tone is going up. Our bass needs to be tonic also, so we'll have them go down to the low A. And then what do we have left? Oh, I haven't even written my note names in yet. A, C, E. We've got 2 A's who could be on our C. Let's do the tenor. And that would leave us with an E in the alto. I love it. And just to reiterate, this is a perfect authentic cadence. The AP free response question doesn't ask you to write in the cadence there, but I think it's nice to. And in fact, I think it's nice to hear what this sounds like at the end. So, are you ready? Oh my goodness, that's a criminal sin when you mess up a perfect authentic cadence there. I was just so excited about our chromatic pitch though. Listen again to that secondary dominant, especially coming from the 6th chord. Listen to that soprano line. Do you hear that? Oh, so fantastic. And then moving on. Much nicer. Okay. So hopefully you were mildly successful on that. I should also mention to you, the wonderful thing about music theory is that this is not the only answer. This this represents one way of the voice leading possible, but if your answer is different than mine, it's possible that you would still receive full credit, assuming that you followed all of the voice leading rules. This is just one possible answer. So today we are concluding section or unit 7 with topic 7.4, part writing of secondary leading tone chords. Hopefully you were able to watch Dr. E on Friday, he introduced the idea of secondary leading tone chords, and then he'll be back with you tomorrow to close out Unit 7. Again, our suggested skills here is to focus on voice leading or part writing, but instead of focusing on FRQ 6, which is what I did last time with you, where you're given the Roman numerals and you write out soprano, alto, tenor, bass, today what I'd like to do is dive into FRQ 5, which is when they give you the figured bass symbols and the bass line. We will have to write in the Roman numerals ourselves and put in the soprano, alto, tenor. Our learning objective here, again, we're focusing on voice leading and our part writing of secondary leading tone chords. Talks about doubling and the leading tone conventions should be maintained. For example, chordal sevens, resolving down by steps. So that is what we will be diving into today. Before we get into the leading tone chords, I do have to make a correction from the last time I met with you guys. The very first example I gave you, I left out the root of the secondary dominant chord. Instead, I had 2/7. I didn't intend to have 2/7. I really think that when I saw this, my brain processed that A as a B. So, you know, if you caught my mistake, good job. I'm going to give you 100 extra points in my imaginary grade book. If you didn't notice, then, you know, maybe you were asleep like I was that morning. So sorry about that. All righty. Let's see. By the way, I definitely would have gotten -5 in that like triangle of doom, because this would be an incorrectly spelled chord. If you recall, I went over kind of how these were graded. So then I would lose a point for spelling the chord wrong, leaving out the fifth of the chord. You know, we can get away with sometimes, but leaving out the root of the chord is not okay. And having 2/7 is not good. But then also I would miss the points for the voice leading going into this chord and out of this chord. So all of this work resolving my sevenths and leading tones. Ugh. Oh, let's see if I can do a better job today. You know, just got to keep you guys on your toes here. Okay, so notice that today we are still dealing with this secondary function where we have this 7 diminished 7 of 6. But now, if you think of it as a fraction, it's like the numerator of the fraction is a diminished 7 chord. Whereas last time we did this, the numerator was a 5 chord, a dominant. So now our process is going to be very similar. When we see this secondary function, we are going to skip it and move on to the second chord. So let's see if my pen is still on. Pen. We are in the key of C minor, and we are going to count up to 6. C, D, E, F, G, A. But because of the key signature, this would actually be an A flat, and might as well spell that whole chord out. C, E flat. So now it says, determine the root of the chord that's a minor second or a half step below the root of that chord. Now, technically, we should be going up. We're thinking to ourselves, we want the 7 of 6, which is A flat. So we are momentarily tonicizing the A flat. The problem with counting up, of course, is just there's a lot. I mean, we have to use 7 whole fingers. That's annoying. But also then when we get up to the top, sometimes I find that my students have a hard time with knowing, should it be a minor seventh, a major seventh? It's a diminished seventh? What's the deal with that? So instead, I would highly recommend that you think to yourself just a half step down. Remember, the name of this is a leading tone chord. So if we think about A flat as being our temporary tonic here, then what is the leading tone of A flat? It's a half step down from there, which would be a G. So that is going to be the root of our 7 diminished 7 of 6 chord. Now I'm going to simply build my 7th chord by using letter names, G, B, D, F. And we need to add accidentals to make the chord a fully diminished 7th chord. Now, it is possible for it to be a half diminished 7 occasionally. It's more unusual. In that case, of course, there would be the little slash through the circle. When it's a full circle, it would be fully diminished. So a fully diminished seventh chord, what does that mean? It's going to be a series of minor thirds stacked on top of each other. So if I start from G and I think a minor third up would be a B flat, which is part of the key. So, I wouldn't really need to alter that pitch. B flat to D would be a major third. I want it to be a minor third. So I'm going to lower that D to a D flat, which is not part of the key. So this is going to be one of those altered pitches. When I put in my voices up here, that's going to need an accidental. And then D flat to F is currently a major third. Again, I want it to be a minor third because I want it to be a fully diminished seventh chord. So this F has to become an F flat, which of course is not part of the key either. So we're going to have to make sure we add an accidental. So if you recall, when we were doing secondary dominance, there was always at least one note that was altered. That was a chromatic pitch outside of the key. Now with our diminished seventh or secondary leading tone chords, I should say, you will always have at least one note that is chromatic. And sometimes, like in this case, you're going to have two pitches that actually need to be altered. So now we can go ahead and think about the inversion and put in the bass. This is root position. So G, oh, should we have him singing way down here? Sure. And don't worry about meter right now. If you're doing quarter notes or half notes, it's not a big deal. And we'll just have some nice spacing at this point in time. How about I'm going to put my F flat here, and our tenor, or no, we're on our alto now, could be a D flat, which would leave me with a B flat in the soprano. Double check, we have a G, a B flat, a D flat, and an F flat. Okay, so now our resolutions. We can put in the bass first, and in this case, the bass happens to be the resolution of the leading tone. Remember, this is called a secondary leading tone. There's some other words for it too, but if we call it a secondary dominant, a secondary leading tone chord, this pitch itself is the secondary leading tone because A flat, is our temporary tonic. G is a half step down that needs to resolve up. And then our seventh is the other pitch that needs to resolve. In this case, it's in the tenor. So if we have him go down, that would be the resolution of our seventh. Let's see, what do we have left then for our alto and our soprano? We need a C. Let's have the alto go down to the C, and how about we double the root, and then the soprano could be on an A flat. All righty, moving on. I'd like to do one more of these. I gave myself a tricky key here, lots of sharps, to help prove a point here. So hopefully at this point in time, you're following along with me. Again, if you are at home sitting at a desk, you don't have to have a special worksheet or anything. Pull out a piece of staff paper, and I would really like you to follow along. It's one thing watching somebody else do it. You have this false sense of confidence. You're like, oh yeah, I totally understand everything she's saying. But then when you actually sit down to do it yourself, it gets a little bit scary. Okay, so we are in the key of B major, and we are going to follow the same process as before. So I'm going to skip my secondary leading tone chord and go to my 2/6 chord, B, C, but because of the key signature, this would be a C sharp, E, G sharp. And it's going to be a 2/6 when I put it in. So if you wanted to put in the E right now, you could, or you can do that later. So now we need to figure out what is the leading tone of our temporary tonic. The temporary tonic is C sharp. So a half step down from C sharp would be C natural, but the problem with that is that we need to change letter names. So that's why it's really important that you think about a minor second, not just a half step. So again, a half step down from C sharp is C natural, but if we want it to be a minor second, we actually have to change letter names from C to B. So our enharmonic tone there would be a B sharp. B sharp to C sharp is a half step relationship. So Now our, and the 4-3 indicates that we do want the 7th, B, D, F, A. I'm just going to put in the letter names and then I'll go back and figure out how to make it fully diminished. Oh, B sharp to D. And remember, technically it's a D sharp because of the key that we have here. Here's a pro tip. When you end up with a lot of accidentals or you have a yucky note to start with, like B sharp, sometimes thinking about just building a fully diminished 7th chord or even thinking about what's a minor third up from B sharp can be a tricky thing. So instead, think to yourself, how many half steps is a minor third? A minor third consists of 3 half steps. So I always like to visualize a piano keyboard in my head. I happen to have a piano next to me here. So I'm going to think about a B sharp, which is a C, and then I'm going to go up a half step, 1, 2, 3, and I end up on a D sharp, aka E flat. And that means that a minor third from B sharp is D sharp, which is part of the key. So that's a whole lot of work just to realize, oh, I don't need to do anything to that note, but it's obviously necessary. Okay, moving on. We need a minor third up from a D sharp. So starting at our D sharp, up a half step, 1, 2, 3, and we end up on an F sharp, which again is part of the key, so I won't need to alter that. And then finally, F sharp to A, I need to think, is that a minor third, F sharp, up a half step, 1, 2, 3. We want it to be an A natural. Now here's the tricky thing. Right here, you're like, yeah, it's an A, no problem. I want it to be an A natural. Look at our original key. We're in the key of B major, which has an A sharp. So I have to go out of my way to actually put a natural sign in front of that A. Otherwise, the person playing the music will play an A sharp because of the key. So we are on step 3. Take note of the inversion and notate the bass first. So this would be 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 2. 4, 3 indicates second inversion. So I'm going to put the F sharp in the bass. And we need some good spacing from there. How about the E sharp in the tenor? I'm going to go with the D sharp here. And again, the key has it already sharp, so I don't need to add that. And an A in A natural in the soprano. All right, last step. We are going to carefully resolve all 10 C tones. So where should we start? We can start with our A up in the soprano. That's our 7th. It needs to resolve down to a G. You don't have to put the arrows in, but especially when you're practicing, I think it's good habit. We need our secondary leading tone, which is the B sharp, needs to go up to the C sharp, which is the tonic. That's our leading tone, secondary leading tone. And then the bass, I don't get to choose. It tells me they want it to be in first inversion, so the bass has to be an E there. I like these problems when it's like, I don't have any choices to make. This has to be, this has to be, this has to be. I'm really just down to the alto and now I have some freedom. To me, freedom is just like, ooh, places that you can mess up. So let's see what we have left. I need a C sharp, an E, and a G sharp. I actually already have one of each of those. So here we go with some freedom. The who is this? The alto could go up to an E, maybe down to a C sharp. Now, in the next problem, we'll talk a little bit more about the diminished 7th to parallel or to perfect, sorry, diminished 5th to perfect 5th motion. But if that makes you nervous right now, especially if you have a choice to avoid those parallels, we could have that D sharp go up to an E. I remember doubling the 3rd here is just fine. I find this particularly nice too, because if you look at the interval between the soprano or the alto and the soprano is a tritone right now. Nice resolution is for those voices to go in towards each other there. Okay. So those, remember, I call chicken nuggets. They're just little write and resolve chicken nuggets. Now we're ready for a chicken strip. This problem would be similar to what you would see in free response question 5 on the AP test. We are given the baseline and some figured bass symbols. We need to write in the key, the Roman numerals, and then the soprano, alto, tenor. Now, this is not actually a question from like a released AP exam. This is one where, clearly we're going to have a secondary leading tone in here, but we have lots of nice root position chords to make our job easier here. So we are going to start off with the key. 1 flat indicates either F major or D minor. The fact that I started on an F and end on an F means that we are in F major here. Okay, so we would have a 1 chord. No, the absence of any figured bass symbols down here means that it's root position. So no little 6 or 6/4 or anything tells me that the F is the root, and in the key of F, obviously F is 1 chord, F, A, C. Now on the AP test, they will always give you this first chord voiced, so you don't have to worry about that. So let's assume that Mrs. Foot gave you that first chord, 2 Fs, an A, and a C in good spacing. Okay, when I get to here, the way figured bass symbols work is that these numbers represent the interval between the bass and the pitches above. So if I count from E up to 6, I'm worrying about that little sharp there, right? So E, F, G, A, B, C. Normally, the 6 would indicate that I want a C, but the sharp indicates that I want a C sharp. Now, obviously, we have an E also, and we have a 5 there. So starting on E, E, F, G, A, B would indicate that we want a B of some kind. Now I'm intentionally kind of just putting all of my letters in a cluster right here because I want to show you how you can figure out what the root of the chord is. And as it is right now, these 3 notes on their own don't really make sense in terms of a triad. So what we know about figured bass symbols is that sometimes there's an implied third. Even though there isn't a little 3 right here, it's implied that we also want the third above the bass. So E, F, G would be also what we need here. Oh goodness, they're all just kind of everywhere right now. Okay, so when I think about what the root of this chord is, you could always play the what if game. What I mean by the what if game, you could think, well, what if E was the root? E, G, B, D, the C sharp wouldn't make sense. Another way for you to do is to think about the 6/5. We know that in our seventh chords, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 2, 6, 5 represents first inversion. So the E of this would represent the third, not the root. Therefore, the root of this chord would be a C sharp, E, G, B. And it's technically a B flat because of the key signature, right? Okay, so what would be the Roman numeral here after we do all of this work? If we think about the key of F and then we go up to a C, that would be a 5th, but clearly because it's a C sharp, it's not just going to be a normal 5 chord. So when in doubt, skip it. Move on to the next chord. This is a nice normal chord because it has nothing underneath it. Therefore, this D is implied to be the root of the chord. So this would be D, F, A. In the key of F, that would be a 6 chord. So now let's go back to this guy that we've been ignoring. Think about what the relationship between a C sharp and a D is. That would be from a leading tone to tonic. And we are temporarily tonicizing this 6. Therefore, this is going to be a 7 diminished 6/5 of 6. All right, let's put in our notes here. keeping in mind that this psaltered pitch, the C sharp, we always want to be really careful with how where it's coming from and where it's going to. Of course, that C sharp, we would want to resolve up to a D in the next chord. And do you see this nice chromatic half step motion that the soprano is singing? That's good. Keep in mind, one of the reasons that we have these voice leading rules is we want it to be conjunct, easy to sing, especially if we're using a chromatic pitch. If we have lots of leaps, then it's going to be very challenging for the person to sing or play on their instrument. Let's see, what is my seventh? It would be the B flat. We're going to have that go down to an A. All right, here's that fifth thing that we have to talk about. But first, let's go ahead and fill in the alto too. I'm going to have that be an F. Okay, some of you might be looking at the bass and the tenor, especially because they're right next to each other, and seeing that that's a fifth and seeing that this is a fifth, and be worried that these are parallel fifths. Well, this specifically comes up when we have these secondary leading tone chords. If you think about the relationship between E to B, that's a perfect fifth. Unfortunately, because of the key, well, actually, fortunately, because of the key, it's not a B, it's a B flat. So E to B flat is a diminished fifth. This is a tritone there in the bass, and which is what makes these, secondary leading tone chords so exciting. It's that they have these tritones, which are dissonant, and they resolve to consonants. Over here, we have A, D to A, which is a perfect fifth. So a diminished fifth to a perfect fifth actually is allowed in our scoring guidelines on the AP test. Another thing for you to think about, again, if we think about what parallel lines are, they have to have the same slope. We're talking about math again, sorry. If I think about the distance that the bass is traveling, E to D, that would be a whole step down. B flat to A is only a half step down. They do not have the same slope. One is going down a whole step, one is only going down a half step. So it's actually similar fifths, not parallel fifths. Very, very tricky there. Okay, let's finish this off in the key of F, F, G, A, B. B flat is our root. D, F, this would be a 4 chord. By the way, it is very common for 6 chords to go into predominance. I'm just going to put in the Roman numerals because I'm so excited to think about the chord progression here. Then, of course, we have a dominant, C, E, G, and tonic, F, A, C. A very basic, simple, common chord progression here, 6 to 4 to 5 to 1. Okay, where are we going to have everybody else go? How about 2 Bs, B flats, an F, and a D? Remember, when in doubt, we want our parts to be very boring. Do you see this soprano line, D and F? The altos are staying. That's nice and boring, in my opinion. All right, we've got predominant to dominant. We need to be careful about parallels. The problem comes when we have our root doubled, and we know we want to double the root over here too. It's so tempting to have the tenor go up to a C also. I showed you on the last problem, what that does is that creates parallel octaves, and we certainly don't want that. So, oh, I just said we certainly don't want that. And then what did I do? I started drawing in a C. Okay, so instead, what did I tell you to do last time? Contrary motion. Oops, sorry about that. We'll have the B go down to a G. We can have the F go down to an E and the A or the D go down to a C. Much better. And we can round this off with our authentic cadence here. Remember, don't forget, I mean, we're so worried about these secondary dominants, but we also just have the regular old boring leading tone in the key of F would be an E, and that's going to occur anytime that you have a 5 chord. So even though it's in the alto, I think that is a good habit to resolve that and Because the soprano is on a C instead of on our tonic, this would be an example of an imperfect authentic cadence instead of a perfect authentic cadence. Can we hear what this sounds like? Because I feel like every time you write a chord progression, you should listen to it. Wonderful. All righty. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to briefly look at this Bach. We started with a chicken nugget, chicken strip. When we look at real music, this is analyzing the whole chicken here. So first, let's just listen to the Bach. I have to turn off my pen. All righty. So we are in the key of B flat major. We start off with some nice tonic chords. I'm going to kind of gloss over some passing tones, and you can take your time and examine thoroughly, or where is our B flat, D, F later when you have more time. We have a 5. One could interpret this as a 5 with a passing tone, or maybe a 5/7. That E would be F, A, C, E. We have a 6 chord, G, B, D in the key of B flat. And then we get into our exciting chord. This chord right here is the whole reason why we're looking at this. When in doubt, skip it. Let's go to the downbeat of measure 6. This is a 6 chord again. We have a G, a B flat, and a D. So if I go back and I think about this F sharp, the F sharp to G is that leading tone relationship. Now, I mentioned earlier about playing the what if game. If you're having a hard time figuring out what the root of a chord is, think to yourself, well, what if this A is the root? Then we would need an A, a C, an E. I don't have an E, a G. What is the F sharp doing there? What is, it doesn't really make sense. If I think, well, what if the C is the root? I need a C, an E, a G. That's not happening. Then if we go over to this F sharp, it's particularly confusing here because do you know what S stands for in this case? Maybe if I put that in, it might help. This G is a suspended pitch. It's a suspension. The numbers 7, 6 come from counting from the bass. A, B, C, D, E, F, G is 7, down to F sharp would be 6. I will be doing a whole review lesson, I don't know when, in a couple weeks on suspensions. So if you need a refresher on how suspensions work, don't worry, that is coming. So the G is actually not part of the chord. Instead, it's an F sharp over here, what it resolves to, the A, the C. Now, in this case, it doesn't have the 7th. So in all of our other examples that we were doing, we were always doing fully diminished 7th chords, 7, diminished 7. This is an example that I wanted to show you where it's just 7 diminished without the 7 of 6. So we don't have to worry about resolving the 7th, but we should still notice resolve the leading tone. Good job, Bach. The F sharp goes up to the G there. And rounding this off, again, I'm ignoring lots of passing tones here. We would have a 1, 6, B flat, D, F, and 5. This would be F, A, C, right? For a nice half cadence at the end. So let's have a listen one more time. It's a nice way to start our morning. Do you hear that dissonance? Dissonance doesn't mean that it has to sound bad. It just sounds more exciting and crunchy and tense, and then it immediately resolves into that lovely 6th chord. So, homework. We are going to go to the 2018 exam. The reason why is because this one honestly is a little bit easier than the 2019 FRQ5. This one doesn't have a suspension for us to worry about. And like I said, I will review suspensions with you at a later time. So another thing that I should warn you ahead of time on is that this practice question does not have any secondary leading tone chords. I know we just spent 45 minutes talking about secondary leading tone chords, but the bigger picture here is the skills that we're working on. Yes, the topic is important too about secondary leading tones, but what we need to be practicing is our skills for our upcoming AP exam. So this, I don't want you to be confused if you're doing it and you're like, wait, where is the secondary leading tone chord? There is not one. Keep in mind that we are in the key of C minor here, so make sure that you raise the regular leading tone. You can see these little symbols over there. Tune in on Wednesday of this week if you don't know what those mean, and I will work through this with you. But in the meantime, this is something that you can do on your own to practice. This will help you prepare for the AP exam. So thank you very much for spending your morning with me. I hope that you all are staying safe at home, and I will see you on Wednesday. Have a good day.